You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Bill Sienkiewicz, and you're listening to the Epic Marvel Podcast.
Hello, welcome back to the Epic Marvel Podcast. This is New Mutants, episode 2B, covering a period of New Mutants from 1984 to 1985. I am your host, Kurtis Findlay.
And I'm your New Mutant host, Franck Martini.
And Frank, what issues are we going to be talking about today?
So we are going to look after the second part of that collection, starting with Annual 1 and then continuing with issue 22 to 31. So the rest of the Bill Sienkiewicz era.
Yes, yeah. This, in the case you didn't hear the last episode, we are covering the Epic Collection, the New Mutants Epic Collection, Volume 2, the Bear Saga. We did half of it last time. We're going to do the second half this time, and there are a few continuing threads that we need to remember, mainly regarding Dani Moonstar got quite a bit injured in the last storyline, and so she's going through some recovery, and there's an ongoing thread with Magneto. We see him pop up in pretty much like a few of the issues at the end there, and then like almost every issue in this book here.
Yeah, and it's really a time when, as we were saying offline, that reading New Mutants really ties with reading Uncanny X-Men.
Yeah.
And there are some plots and subplots that go from one book to another. I would say that my recommendation would be to maybe read X-Men circa issue 185 to 200. That's roughly the same time than this volume is taking place. And it's interesting to see how the books bounce from one to another.
Yes, Claremont really does use these kind of as one title, just, published every other week or something like that. And it's hard. I didn't feel this in the last half of the book, but this half, I really felt like I needed to read those X-Men issues, but I wasn't reading those X-Men issues as I was reading these. So there were a lot of things where I'm like, oh man, I think I remember what's happening over in that title. And I really should have just pulled out Marvel Unlimited. This era hasn't yet been covered in the Epic collections, so I can't just pull that off my shelf. I don't have the Omnis or anything like that. But I felt at a disadvantage quite a few times not knowing what was going on in the other book, which I think is not a great way to write your comics.
Yeah, because I think that there are some really key moments, like the Hylians subplots that we see early in the next few issues that get you a heads up in Uncanny X-Men. The Magneto thing also leads to something that happened in Uncanny X-Men 200. And I think there are some other things that may also impact New Mutants. Of course, we have Secret Wars 2, which is going to impact the whole of the Marvel Universe at the time.
Yeah. In
sometimes a very annoying way, I must say.
Yes.
And, so that's a moment when each book is not working on its own, really. And you need maybe to have a wider understanding of the Marvel Universe to fully enjoy what is happening in this book, because of the Cloak and Dagger stuff that took place initially in the Marvel Team Up Annual and the Spectacular Spider-Man issues, plus also the Beauty and the Beast with Dazzler and the Beast miniseries.
Yep.
So there's quite a lot of stuff that needs to be maybe not read, but that helps the experience compared to the beginning of this volume. Absolutely.
Yeah, and kind of compared to a lot of these Epic collections, I mean, I know that the Marvel Universe is a shared universe, and writers do like tying things together, and Claremont especially really likes continuity, but I felt like he was really going even deeper into continuity than he usually does. I mean, there were references, you mentioned references to a bunch of stuff already, but there's also like there's a reference to the Firestar miniseries and many issues of the X-Men Legion, and I just was like, boy. So because of that, some of these issues I didn't enjoy as much as other ones. There are three main story arcs in this collection, and one of them I really liked, and the two others I was not as keen on.
Oh, that's funny because me too, and we will see if we have the same hits and misses.
I bet we do. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have to see that for sure. So we have a few comments that were left since the last time we recorded, and so I think they're definitely worth talking and mentioning here in this episode. So over on Facebook, Tommy left a great comment. He says, about the Demon Bear Saga epic, the issues before Sienkiewicz starts penciling feel like the series was running out of steam. I think I made that exact same comment when we were recording. And after he comes in, the series gets some new energy. The Demon Bear Saga feels like a horror movie. Same with the Warlock issue. The story arc with Legion is also great. I have, however, mixed feelings about the other story arcs with Cloak and Dagger and Dazzler in the arena. I think Tommy's reading our minds here as well. I'm pretty sure you feel the same way.
Yeah.
Without reading the Cloak and Dagger series by Bill Mantlo, you won't get the full story. Same with the Dazzler story arc. If you don't know what's happening on her series, you miss a lot of context. Wow, he's saying exactly what we were just saying.
Yeah.
On an ending note, too bad the end of the story arc with, I'm going to leave the spoiler right there, with so-and-so, drawn by Steve Lealoha, was left to Epic Volume 3, and who knows when that will be released. Maybe Marvel wants this volume to end when Bill Sienkiewicz exits. Overall, this is where the series matured a bit, and too bad some of the story arcs were weak, and he says he loved that Bob McLeod came back for the annual.
I think it's interesting because we had about the ending note and when the epic ends. I think in terms of the amount of stories, it makes sense to end there because of the page count.
Yeah.
And we have a French edition that covers the whole Bill Sienkiewicz era. So we have 7 or 8 extra issues afterwards where Sienkiewicz is inking Steve Lealoha first and then Rick Leonardi, if I remember well, and maybe someone else. So it feels a bit more of a global package, even though the ending of issue 38 is an open ending. So it made me feel like reading more stuff, which is not available in French yet. So they had to cut at one moment, and I think it may not be the worst moment, actually.
Yeah, I didn't feel like that it was a problem ending it, because I felt like, I haven't read these next issues, but they say that they're going to go on a quest, basically, to find a certain person, and that feels like it's going to be a multi-part story. So yeah, saving it for the next volume, I think, is probably okay. Maybe I'll have a different opinion once I read those issues. So on Instagram, we also have some comments here. Mark42 Smith says, I absolutely loved this volume. The Demon Bear Saga was great, but the real standout for me was the arc with Legion. Made me want to see more of Legion, and very curious what other personalities he has. This volume was definitely better than the first one, which was good, but not great. Warlock is my favorite new mutant, and to me, the book gets much better after he and Magic join the team.
Yeah, because it gets into a different territory when they arrive. We get into some weirder stuff as soon as they're here.
Very true.
Just look at the difference of the look and feel of Warlock in that annual when he's pretending to be human, and drawn by Bob McLeod, and when we see him doing the same thing during the Bill Sienkiewicz issues. I think it's the first issue when they arrive on Muir Island. So it gets weirder immediately, and the demonic aspect and the demonic powers of Indiana makes the whole thing edgier, I would say. So yeah, makes sense.
I wonder if Claremont and McLeod had a little bit of a difference of opinion on where they wanted the book to go, because McLeod was very much part of the team that developed the book and decided on the characters and all this kind of stuff. Like, he was very much a co-creator, and once he leaves the book, Claremont starts putting in these new things. And I think the arrival of Bill Sienkiewicz definitely helps that along as well. So like let me see here. Once Bob McLeod leaves, then that's when magic comes in, and we start dealing with the demon world and everything like that. And then
Yeah, there's a transition with Sal Buscema at first, but yeah, Bob McLeod is still around because he's inking part of those stories.
yeah, I don't know what the flow of continuity here is in terms of how they worked together once he was only inking and that kind of stuff. So I have no idea. But yeah, Warlock is one of those characters that, an incredible artist designs an incredibly complex character. And then, unfortunately, every other artist who comes along has to try and mimic that. And it's like, holy cow, this is a very, very difficult character.
Yeah,
And Bill can do
because
it.
Warlock doesn't look like anything we've seen before. So
Nope.
it's very complex because it has very much the vibe of Bill Sienkiewicz. So it must have been a tough thing to follow.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. And we see that just in this annual when Bob McLeod is trying his best to do Warlock. And he does a pretty good job, but something that's born out of Bill Sienkiewicz's mind, like purely out of his mind, is going to be hard to reproduce by other people. Okay, one more comment. This is from a user called The Watcher Collects Comics. He says, I never enjoyed New Mutants as a young teen, but always wondered, who is this book for? Very mature for a preteen, and always issues I had to read 3 or 4 times to understand. It was about characters who just turned teens a few years before me, but it read very differently. The Bill Sienkiewicz covers were jarring for me back then as a kid, but as an adult now, I appreciate his stylistic avant-garde covers that definitely stood out from all the others. I really enjoyed learning more about magic, her teleportation, discovering her sorcerer's powers, and the soul sword. I also really enjoyed Sunspot as I saw him as being different, emotionally charged, even idealistic, a frustrated troublemaker at times, and a long way from his purchase of AIM in the future. What I struggled with was Warlock. Hated the character, hated his depiction, and his speech bubbles were a pain in the backside. I just couldn't get into him, and it almost had me quit book. It reads better now than back in the day when it was a tougher read.
Yeah, it ties with what we said last week. I think that if you read that stuff now as a grown-up, it's easier to read than if you did it in the 80s. And once again, I was 12 or 14 when I read that for the first time.
Yep.
And it was a very challenging read. And also, even today, I mean, it was not an easy read for me. I mean, it took me, sometimes I had to read some issues twice just to make sure I was not missing some of the pieces. And sometimes because the art is very much the leading factor of the book, and it feels like Claremont was adding some stuff on top of the art.
Yeah.
Trying to fill in some of the details
Yep.
that would have been left out. So there's a lot of stuff to read. Well, Claremont was verbose anyway, so but it feels that sometimes he has to over-explain what is happening on the page and gives a lot of detail, especially in the Legion issues. I think it's not a very easy read, I think.
No, I agree. I especially think that you're right on with Claremont adding a lot of text to give the pictures context. And while Bill Sienkiewicz is a great storyteller, I found that his Moon Knight stuff read a little bit easier when his style wasn't as
wild.
As wild. Yeah, exactly. I think that as the more and more stylistic he gets, just his concepts of storytelling are a little bit harder to follow. I felt that way reading the Elektra Assassin miniseries as well. Some of that is like, what is going on here? But there's still enjoyable stuff for sure. And we'll get into a lot of those specific details when we get into those issues as well.
Yeah.
Let's start off with the New Mutants annual number 1, Cosmic Cannonball Caper. Gotta love this cover, straight out of the 80s. I love this so much. It's like, first of all, it's a Star Wars parody, and then you add in the whole rock, like punk rock kind of aspect of it. It's just wonderful. And Bill Sienkiewicz, the colors he uses, the way he paints the style, it looks like a 1980s movie poster. I just think it's great.
Or it could be a band album cover too.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Could be something like that as well. So definitely an awesome cover.
And then in the inside, yeah, Bob McLeod returns. Chris Claremont and Bob McLeod kind of get one last, I think this is the last time they're going to work on this title together. And McLeod and Palmer are both credited as inkers. And I could only pick maybe just like 2 or 3 pages of Palmer inking. So I think he just had to help out in a few places. But McLeod does most of this himself. And McLeod is also credited as the letterer. So he actually did a lot of work on this book. Not only that, it's double size, or is it a triple size issue? I think it's a triple size issue. No, maybe just double size.
No, double size.
Yeah, still, that's good. And for an annual, and Bob McLeod admits that he's not the fastest, then he can take his time to make all of the pages look really good. And it is a nice looking issue, as good as any of his earlier issues of New Mutants. As far as the story is concerned, we meet a couple of new characters here, or one new character. We meet Leela Cheney, who is a rock star, and apparently all of the New Mutants are fans of her band and are really excited to go to her concert. And they get wrapped up in this mystery because something is trying to attack Leela Cheney during her concert. Turns out, of course, because this is an X-Men book, she is a mutant herself, and she gets romantically involved with Cannonball, which is always kind of amusing. I found that this issue I think it was too long, and not a lot happens, so it wasn't that interesting, and I'm not exactly sure even, what exactly the point was. I mean, we just have all of these people, these creatures who are after Leela Cheney, and the New Mutants help defend her from that, and in the end, she just kind of goes away. I mean, it's one of these annual stories that is just it's not meant to. I don't think it was meant to tie into the larger picture. Except Leela Cheney comes back in the pages of New Mutants a few issues later. So I don't know. It has no real consequence, I don't think.
No, not really. And that's some really weird thing, especially Leela Cheney getting involved with Sam, because I really don't know how old she is, but she looks quite older than him.
Yeah.
Honestly, even though in the future she would be seen as a very young person. There's some really strange thing also at the beginning. I know that you play music, and I've done a bit of music myself as well, and that's not at all like a concert would take place, or even the rehearsal and all that. So it looks really much like Claremont doesn't know how a concert is taking place, honestly. And then there's the powers of Leela Cheney. I mean, she can teleport people from one side of the galaxy to another side of the galaxy. Like, what is that, really? So there's quite a lot of things which are really strange in this issue.
And she has other powers as well, right?
Yeah.
There's at one point where she creates some sort of light show or something like that, kind of like Dazzler, I guess, but it obstructs the view of the people so that Cannonball and this monster can't be seen. And there's other times when she wraps them up in like a force field or something like that. And the teleporting thing is it seems like she can only teleport to one specific place across the galaxy where she lives in a Dyson sphere on the other side of the galaxy. So it is kind of bizarre.
And it felt really strange to see this issue in the middle of the Bill Sienkiewicz stuff.
Yeah.
It felt like there was a Silver Age story in the middle. Or something very classic compared to what we were seeing.
Yeah.
So it ties with the Warlock. So obviously it fits there. But maybe if we had seen this issue before the Demon Bear Saga, the experience would have been different. But you have just read the Demon Bear Saga, and then you get into the Cloak and Dagger stuff. And this feels out of place.
Well, it feels like New Mutants when it started. Like it has the feeling of old New Mutants before it went through its transformation. Yeah, you mentioned Warlock is here, so it has to be placed in this after his first appearance. But it also has Danny. It has a scene with Danny recovering, like going through physical therapy with Stevie because of her injuries, and so it kind of has to be placed after Demon Bear as well. And then with everything with Leela, because she comes in later on in the book. We can't even place this at the end of the book as like a kind of a bonus feature. It really does have to go right here in the middle, continuity wise.
And I think I've spotted the Tom Palmer pages I think page 31 of the annual.
Yep. Oh, totally. 31 and
32.
32.
For sure, those are Tom Palmer's work. Maybe up to 34. 35 could be as well.
Yeah, I think definitely, yeah, you're right. 31 and 32 are the standouts for sure. Some of the faces don't look like they were touched by Tom Palmer, but maybe they were on page 33 and 34. But the way that the beast's hair, the creature's hair is inked, and like Cannonball's his whatever you call it, his power, that's definitely a Tom Palmer thing. But once we get to 36, that's back to Bob McLeod for sure.
It's gone. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So it's just those few pages right in there. That's it.
Nice.
Yeah. There are some cool effects that happen here, like using a yellow color hold on, let's see, what pages are these? Page 19 and 21 and 22, when Leela Cheney is, or a Warlock, when they're using their light powers. I like it when artists try to use the color holds, because it just adds a little bit more texture to the page. This is the days before computers, so it's a little bit, they use it sparingly because it's a lot more work to do just those drawings that are outlined in a color that's not black.
Yeah, it's and page 22 as well. You get that vibe of yellow, which tie also with the costumes, with the New Mutant costumes. So it's really this. There are quite a few moments when there's even later on with Magma's powers being displayed. So there's quite a lot of play with the yellow color here.
Yeah. And we get to learn a little bit more about Warlock through this issue as well, especially the extent to which he can shapeshift. And he turns himself into a giant spaceship that carries everybody through space, which we won't see at all through the rest of this book. Warlock is way more reserved in his abilities than he is in this book. Like he's shapeshifting into a bunch of things in this one issue that he doesn't do when Bill Sienkiewicz is in charge of drawing him.
Yeah, I mean, he turns into a spaceship and also into a cryogenic system.
Right, yeah.
For the New Mutants throughout the So
quite
this
amazing.
is what we call a convenient powers.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly it. Yeah, I find that actually a bunch of New Mutants have convenient powers, including Danny and Magic. Like, they kind of pull out whatever they need to whenever, just to make the story move forward, especially Magic.
Oh, yeah. I think that what is really what I really enjoyed is the evolution of Sam's character, because he's very insecure, and we would see that throughout the whole rest of the book. And this is the beginning of something, of him being more assertive because of the story with Leela Cheney, and how it will impact him in the future, in the way he dresses. So it's the beginning of his evolution and his maturing, and I think it was very well played, because it's small breadcrumbs that you have to pick along the way. But for sure, at the end of this epic, Sam is not the same character than you saw at the beginning.
Very true. That's a good point. I think that just the fact that this woman, and perhaps because she's an older woman, took an interest in him, that he just gained a whole lot of confidence and saw himself differently. That's an interesting observation.
And I think that Leela Cheney was a sort of Runaways, Joan Jett, Chrissy Hine kind of character.
Totally.
Did you feel like that?
Yep. Yeah, I think that both Claremont and especially Bill Sienkiewicz were very attuned to the kind of the punk rock era of the 80s. You see that come out so much through this last half of this book here, especially the one Cyndi Lauper character that we'll meet later on in the Legion story.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Let's keep on going over to New Mutants number 22.
Okay, so this issue is the first issue of the four-parter involving Cloak and Dagger, and it's called The Shadow Within. So it starts with the New Mutants on practice sessions with the X-Men, which I thought was a very, very nice point, and a very nice way of thinking, that those kids don't always work with the Professor Xavier, but also can work with the X-Men. And that's very interesting.
Well, it's a concept that's used ever since, like the idea of the teachers having specific classes that they teach, like the X-Men. This is kind of the start of that, because up until this point, the X-Men haven't had a younger class of mutants in order to teach. But nowadays we have, there's that Wolverine and the X-Men mini or ongoing series for a while where it focuses solely on Wolverine being a teacher, and this is so it's cool to see the start of that here. here.
Yeah, and Kitty has always been part of that teaching team as well, even though she was very young. Well, not as young, of course, now than she was then, but yeah, having those guys being teachers and helping the others, the youngers, on how to use their powers and how to make the most of it. That was very, very nice, I think.
Yeah.
And not only with their powers, because the scene between Kurt and Rain is also about accepting someone else's difference. And I think that the connection, and there is an ongoing plot with Rain about how she has issues accepting people who are very out of her religion scope.
Yeah.
She's very much a religious person, and she has issue with those demonic powers and demonic look and feel. So Illyana and Nightcrawler here. So all scenes involving that are different from your average bonding between characters.
I really liked it. You can see the struggle. Part of it is because she herself, and we see this come up later in the book, she herself is constantly being called a demon by the people, even by the people she looks up to and the people that taught her religion. She herself believes that she has demon qualities that are not acceptable or whatever, and so she has a hard time accepting that in others as well. And then once she becomes, I think, more confident in herself and realizes that she's okay, she's not a demon, then she can start looking at other people that way too.
Yeah, and the character has changed so much after the Executioner Song. I can't remember which one. When she's in Genosha with Havoc, and then she joins X Factor. She's a completely different character than who she is at that point. So we can see through the book the evolution that she's had.
Oh, sorry, is that Extinction Agenda?
Yeah, Extinction Agenda. Yeah, it's the one with the New Mutants and the X-Men and X Factor.
That's the one, yeah.
So we see also that Colossus and Sunspot are practicing together, and Sunspot's powers are getting crazy and injured. There is an injury for Peter there, so we're wondering what is happening there. And Rain, following the encounter she had with Nightcrawler, goes to her room and starts writing a kind of fairy tale story. And at first glimpse, and when you see the cover and you look at that and you see the first 2 pages of the fairy tale, you feel like maybe you are into the another chapter of Kitty's fairy tale, the X-Men issue from 150 or something like that.
Yep.
And it's a completely different story that's happening there, because it starts as your Walt Disney environment, and suddenly it becomes a horror story, which, if you look at the cab, for instance, it's sort of predates what you would see in Inferno, for instance.
Yeah.
And so she leaves the character she writes, who's a better looking version of herself, goes to the city and encounter a couple of creatures that look a lot like Cloak and Dagger. And she turns into a Wolfbane character into that story and attacks both characters. And that's how the story ends, with Rain sleeping, holding in her hand the necklace that we could see on the Dagger lookalike character a few pages before. And we don't really know what has been going on there. And it will be up to the next issue to find out what is going on. But it feels like there's something wrong with Cloak and Dagger and with Rain's and Roberto's power there.
So if you were reading this when it was brand new and didn't have the hindsight to already know that this is a Cloak and Dagger story, this is a very bizarre issue. Most of it is taken up by the training session. You have a long interlude with the Hellfire Club and the coming of a new character, Selene, who's going to be introduced into the Hellfire Club. And then this weirdo dream that takes place. Like, the story actually only starts in the last 3 pages of this book. very strange. I thought this was it's a cool issue. I really enjoy the character development that happens and the creativity behind that dream. And I'll just make a note that the Walt Disney style here is specifically Sleeping Beauty. The prince and all of her clothes and the animals, they're all styled off of the way that those characters are designed in that movie. And then the cab, the taxi with the weird face that you pointed out earlier, I think that is a reference. Actually, probably this is when did Who Framed Roger Rabbit come out? It was in the 80s, and I don't know if it would have been out by this point or not. It might have been, but that definitely reminded me of the taxi cab from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, true. And the change is incredible there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, I don't know how it is because I have a digital edition, as I said. So I don't know how the page turning works.
Oh, you
Because on the
absolutely
French
flip the page.
Oh, okay. Same thing in the French edition. And it's, I mean, such a change, such a visual change. The colors are completely different because the last page with the prints and all that, it ties with a lot of red.
Yeah, it's all the primary colors.
And yellow. And suddenly you're into this grayish, bluish
muted
area,
tones.
which is so completely different change of tone in just one page, and suddenly you're not in a fairy tale, you're in a horror movie.
Great introduction to the story here, and we get a couple more bonus pin-up pages at the end of this issue, one for Wolfsbane, one for Mirage, and one for Magma. All really nice. I like the way that he's done these.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on to New Mutants number 23, with Cloak and Dagger prominently featured on the cover, which is kind of cool. I do like this cover a lot. This issue is called Shadow Man, and in this issue we find out that there's way more going on with Sunspot than we knew. He's going absolutely bonkers, and so they have to subdue him and find out what's going on. And meanwhile, Rain has also disappeared and wakes up in a hotel not knowing where she is. They find out that her powers are kind of going a little loony as well. So Danny and Cannonball are our two focus characters that kind of try and figure out what's going on here. And this issue, again, even though it has Cloak and Dagger on the front cover, they don't come into play in this issue until like the very end when we see them in a hospital room. They're not even in their costumes. They don't have their powers anymore, and we don't know what's going on, but we can figure out that they're connected to this somehow. And then the issue kind of ends as Sunspot goes a little nuts. So this is more of a build-up issue as well. I think it's taking a really long time for this story to unfold. And when you said this is the first of a 4-part story, I'm like, oh yeah, it is 4 parts. Did it really need to be 4 parts? I don't know.
No, and we will get to that in the next 2 issues.
Yeah.
I think there are nice moments when you look at each part of the issue. There are some really interesting, and I like the Danny Sam dynamic.
Yes.
There's a very weird scene, I think, when Sam enters into Danny's room as she's changing clothes or getting dressed.
Yeah, that's a Chris Claremont thing. He
really
loves
weird.
doing that.
And well, there's one thing on this page also that I loved throughout the Bill Sienkiewicz run is the way he uses Charles Xavier's head as a background for his panel.
Yeah.
When he's talking telepathically with people, we will see that 3 or more times afterwards. And I think it's brilliant because it's completely different from what we saw in the past to present the way his power connect with people.
Exactly. It's not just like a floating disembodied head that's in the top corner or something like that. Yeah, he does a really, really good job of portraying his astral form and how he communicates telepathically. Very cool stuff. I also really love what he does with Roberto. And when Sunspot is going pretty crazy here, it has shades of the demon bear, kind of like just a big blobby black mass with a scary face. You just see the teeth and kind of spiral eyes, kind of looking a little, just looking angry and, well, crazy, basically. I love it. I think that it adds so much to take away the definition of a character and leave it mysterious, just being filled as almost a black silhouette. Adds a lot of mystery and a lot of kind of scariness to the character.
Yeah, I think it predates also the appearance of Venom and the way some of the uses of the blacks would be done with Venom and the way it will be displayed on the most visually appealing displays of Venom's power and costume. And I felt there was a nice connection with that.
Yeah.
In terms of the story, I have to say that I'm a big Cloak and Dagger fan.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy them and having them here. And if you haven't read at least the annual, which is on the Epic one, there is no way you can really understand what is going on.
I agree. They don't really explain anything, and even later on, they don't even.
They've
It's hard
just
to
mentioned
understand.
once that there was a drug that was given, that the same drug that was given to Cloak and Dagger was given to Sunspot and Wolfbane, but you don't know really what had happened in the annual. And I think it makes sense to read it, because if you read the Cloak and Dagger collections, you will see that they reprint this story with the New Mutants. You get the annual as well, and you get the Spectacular Spider-Man, of course. And it works a bit more organically if you read it that way. And now it feels like a bit out of the blue. And even though the way and why suddenly the drug kicks in, which will be further explained on the next issues, but we don't really know why it's happening now and why it didn't happen before. What's the suddenly, why is it so sudden?
So I pulled the Cloak and Dagger collection off of my shelf to have a look to see in here, and there are a lot of issues in between including one of their miniseries in between the New Mutants annual and this story here. But there's no sense of their powers waning or disappearing or anything like that. It's all of a sudden you get to these New Mutant issues and their powers are just gone. Whereas we've had at least a little bit of build up in these issues where Roberto and Rain have been acting a little bit out of character. We saw that in a few issues in the first half of this book. So there was a little bit of build up, but for the Cloak and Dagger, on the Cloak and Dagger side of things, and this is probably because they just didn't have their own regular series. It's just kind of out of the blue.
Yeah. The regular series happened after that.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really a regular series because there were split book, if I remember well, but
Right.
I may be wrong here.
No, you're right, with Doctor Strange. But I mean, it still was a regular book for them. They had the regular feature that happened every month, but that wasn't until quite a bit after this.
Yeah, because they were very much Bill Mantlow's creature by then, because he created them in Spectacular Spider-Man. Is the best, what I think is the best moment of his run on Spectacular. So around issue 65 to 80, they appear quite a lot. They get very much involved into the crime scene, because there is quite a lot of crime background into that time, with the Punisher and Silvermane being as important character then in Spectacular. And Bill Mantlo then did the miniseries and the regular series as well. Oh, and we have a Warlock's character profile at the end.
Oh, yes, that's right.
The final page of this story.
Great picture.
So we continue with issue 24, called The Hollow Heart, which is an issue where people talk a lot.
Yes.
I must say. Right.
Oh, man.
So the setup is that Rain and Roberto have Cloak and Dagger's powers, or some sort of powers, and they follow and they get to Cloak and Dagger's safe place, which is St. Anne's Church, where Father Bowen, who's Dagger's uncle, is a priest there. Finally, Professor Xavier finds out about the drug story that happened in the annual. So there's a one-page recap that gives you what you need to know about the annual, but in a very condensed way.
Yep.
And then finally, towards the end, the whole team gathers in the church, and Iliana tries to gets Roberto and Rain and takes them to Limbo to try and perform an exorcism on them, and she fails. And as she returns inside the church, Cloak and Dagger, Tandy and Tyrone arrive on the scene. There's a lot of talking there. There's not so much happening, and a lot of talking and a lot of back and forth between characters. That's my main concern about this story, really.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that Chris Claremont is trying to develop Cloak and Dagger a bit too much, or see what's going on in their minds. They're not the feature characters, yet a lot of this dialogue, a lot of the time is spent on them. And I don't know if it's because we need to understand Cloak better, especially Cloak, because what's happened happening to Roberto, he doesn't know how to handle the power, but Cloak knows how to handle the power that eats away at you, the power that really consumes you, and now Tyrone doesn't know what to do without the power now that he doesn't have it. He's kind of wrestling through those feelings, and I mean all of that's going to come to a head in the next issue as they kind of put everything back in order. But yeah, to see so much time devoted to them when like they just kind of appeared out of the blue, and I don't know, it just seemed like a bit much for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's quite a lot of filler in there because, for instance, the 2.5 pages with the Colossus sequence.
Yeah.
Of course, it's great looking.
Yeah.
But it doesn't bring much on the table. Also, I felt that getting Rogue into the story, because she's part of the team for this issue, it's very serviceable because she's there, because she's going to play a role in the conclusion of the story.
Yeah,
But
I know. I noticed that
there's,
too.
There's no reason why she should be here.
Yeah, and like she appears and has like one line and then just disappears or something like that. And yeah, I was like, why is she here? And yeah, she does have a very specific person, and it's the whole Chekhov's gun. You don't introduce something unless it's going to pay off later. So of course she has to have a role. Claremont's very particular in all of these story arcs about which members of the team he's putting in in each of these story arcs, because none of these story arcs feature the entire team.
Yeah, that's one of my main thing against those issues. It's that we don't see the team. We never see the complete team, and sometimes the team is not even the main character of its book.
Yeah. I think, and also and this is something that Claremont has done with the X-Men as well. Like he'll just focus on a couple characters, but those are all way more developed characters by the time he starts doing that. Like when he started with the X-Men, with Giant Size X-Men, there were only 6 members of the team, and so you can have them in every issue. But then he keeps adding more and more characters, and New Mutants. Since the beginning of the team, I know we've lost Karma, but we gained Magma, we gained Magic, we've gained Douglas, we've gained Warlock. It's like we gained a whole lot of characters all of a sudden, and so now his team is too big to fit into one storyline, it seems. So he has to pick apart his team and choose which characters he wants to use. Kind of too bad.
Yeah, a couple of things. We have a nice cameo of Peter Sellers, Inspector Clouseau. Oh, was it on the previous issue in the hospital? No, it was on the previous issue. I forgot to mention that. I don't know if you spotted that.
Yeah, it's on in this collection. It's on page 305.
Yeah, I thought it was just funny for the sake of it, but sorry, I missed it when we were talking about that.
So strange.
And I think it's Bill Sienkiewicz having fun for the sake of it, and I quite enjoy that.
Totally.
And we continue to have the subplots with Magneto and Lee Forrester, and we still don't really understand why it's happening there, and not in the pages of X-Men. But it's like really, really like a soap opera kind of thing. Will they, one day kind of thing. That we come to a head later on, but feels very strange, I think.
It does, and it will continue to feel very strange through the rest of this book and maybe even into the third book. I mean, I know because I know the future of this character, I know why they're doing it. They're doing it to show because they need to get Magneto into a place that readers will understand and accept when he eventually, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, has a closer tie with the New Mutants. So where these stories are, these little interludes are specifically to let us know that Magneto is not the person that we thought he was. He's becoming a reformed character. And this scene in particular, where he actually admits that he's wrong and apologizes for something, is an important moment for his character.
Yeah, because I think it really started with the last fight he had with the X-Men in X-Men 150.
Yep.
And then we have Secret Wars, the first Secret Wars miniseries, when we see that he's not really a villain.
Right, he's placed on the hero team.
He's somewhere in between. And I think it's the continuation of what we saw there. Yeah, obviously it's character building, but it feels out of place in that book because it will not have an impact on the book for 7 or 8 issues further, or maybe 10 issues further.
Yeah, exactly. The only reason why we can accept it now is we know what's going to happen to his character in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep on going to our conclusion of this story. New Mutants number 25, The Only Thing to Fear. This, if you thought there was a lot of talking in the last issue, then you're going to be in for a shock here. I couldn't believe the amount of dialogue. And basically, this whole issue is just like sitting in a room talking to each other. And you eavesdrop on different people's conversations. And there's only a brief moment when they break from that in order to like restore the powers and go into limbo in order to, set things right again. But holy cow, there was just a lot going on in terms of character, like trying to do a bunch of character development. Now, my favorite part in the issue is actually one of the really dialogue-heavy moments where Xavier is talking to Tyrone. And one of the reasons I like that is because the thing you mentioned earlier of the way that he portrays Xavier talking to someone in his astral form or in his mind, and I think a lot of this is because of the colorist as well, coloring the background just as a background instead of, coloring him in blue like he's a ghost or something like that. He's just sitting there in a chair, and I love it. I love the way that they portray that. But the dialogue is also really good too. And here's where we find out why we're spending so much time focused on Tyrone, because through this conversation, we find out that Tyrone, he is able to control his power because man, I don't even know how to explain it here. It's the fear. Tyrone was afraid of using it, and so it kind of kept him from letting it control him, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. Yes, it ties with his insecurity, I think.
Whereas Roberto, being much more of an egocentric person, allowed it, whether it was subconscious or not, allowed it to gain a much more control over him, and then he became uncontrollable himself. So it's kind of a backwards way of thinking. You would think that people who are more confident in themselves could control things more, but it's the reverse.
I really enjoyed that conversation, and I really liked also the way the page with only the 6-panel page with Tyrone on one side and Professor X on the other side. Yeah. And the coloring in the background changes from black to orange.
Yes, like he's having a revelation.
Yeah, because in the previous page, Tyrone was also on a dark background, and suddenly is opening to the idea of becoming Cloak again and accepting himself. And we also understand that part of his stuttering tied with his insecurity and so on. So there's a lot of character building there, yes. Yeah. And that's one of the things I enjoyed most. But once again, I really like Cloak and Dagger. But there is not so much happening in terms of New Mutants themselves.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, it's I just don't understand what's going on here. And the reason for bringing Rogue into the picture is because she can absorb people's powers, she takes the light from Rain, and
and also the dark. She takes the light and channels the darkness thanks to the light.
Yeah,
I think
it's
No, it's convenient. I know.
It's very convenient. I don't even think, like, Rogue is still a fairly new character at this point, so her powers aren't as defined as well, but that's not really something that I associate with Rogue being able to do.
No, not really.
So I think it's kind of something they just made up at the time. But really, couldn't Danny or somebody have done the same thing? I think that with Danny and Professor working together, they could have channeled that, like, because Danny has some psi powers herself, and I feel like they could have just used her.
It's just that the way they manage the characters' powers, they don't exist on their own. They need someone to there is a transfer. It's not like Venom, for instance, which can exist on its own.
Right.
So there needs to be
a conduit,
something channeling. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I mean, I still think that Danny could have been that person, kept it in
within
the team.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And this is when we talk about Illyana's powers once again, because the fact that they go to limbo and they come back, we will see later on during the the gladiator moment story, then the way that when she teleports, there is a time aspect.
Right, the time jump.
Changing, the time jump. Sometimes it's helpful, so it takes place. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
That's
inconsistent. Or just is it
very
unpredictable? You could just call that unpredictable, and it seems to work. But yeah, it's for the sake of the story.
Your no prize is on the way.
Yeah, thank you. Oh boy. Nice to finally see Cloak and Dagger in their costumes, kind of back to their old form at the very end and doing what they do. I mean, there was kind of this little subplot about this guy named Slick who was trying to recruit kids to get them hooked on drugs and stuff. And true enough, that's a classic Cloak and Dagger story. And they kind of saved the day in the last 2 pages of this story as well. So it's like we get a kind of a full-fledged Cloak and Dagger story in this issue.
And there's I really feel we could have seen some Bill Sienkiewicz on Cloak and Dagger, because this could have been something very interesting, visually speaking.
No kidding. With his huge cloak, I can just imagine Bill Sienkiewicz having a great time with that and the light aspect. And that would be cool.
I have a major issue with the character profiles, and I don't understand how, editorially speaking, you could spoil the next story arc in 1 page.
Yeah, that's so weird. Hey,
why did they choose to profile David Haller and explain who he is right off the bat?
And blatantly huge spoiler alert. Yeah, I don't understand that either. It made it so that we knew the whole time reading this story, and they danced around the secret for so long within these next few issues that
exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if that was just an oversight or if this pinup was supposed to be a couple issues later or something, but bad mistake.
For sure, it's an editorial mess on this part. The second one, though, is much more interesting on Lila Cheney, and there is a part of me who wishes to understand a bit more about her being a slave and so on, something which is hinted each time she appears. Obviously, she has a very tough past tied to her powers and tied to who she is. And it really makes me feel like I want to know more about her.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
Okay, so the start of the next story arc, New Mutants number 26. This issue is called Legion.
The story starts with on Muir Island, and we find out more about Tom Corsi and Sharon Friedlander, who were the two persons who were abducted during the Demon Bear Saga and came back as Native Americans. And we find out that especially Tom has developed some kind of superpower and has got extra strength. And as he's practicing, there is something happening on the room of a patient of Muir Island called David, and the whole room seems to explode, and the lab seems to explode. And we also find out that there is a possible split personality situation there. So very quickly, the New Mutants, a part of the team arrives on the scene. So does the kid's mother. So it's Gabrielle Haller, who was last seen on Uncanny X-Men 161. So it's the issue that really set up the Xavier's and Magneto's past during World War II. So it really established also a new ground and a new shades of gray for Magneto. So it's interesting to see that there's a connection with that. So as they arrive, there are some really nice character bonding moments, especially Moira and Rain. And then Charles Xavier tries to enter David's mind, but he gets rejected, and eventually Rain and Moira are attacked by an astral projection of a young Arabic person, and there's another explosion at the end of the issue. There's a lot of setup there.
A lot of setup.
Quite a lot, yeah.
One thing I was confused about was the appearance of Banshee at the beginning of this issue. Now, in the last storyline, we specifically said Rogue was in this story because she's used for a very specific reason in the last issue of the story arc. But that's not the case for Banshee here. He's just here, and we don't see him ever again. He doesn't appear at all throughout the rest of this story arc, even though it takes place on Muir Island. So, what's the point? I don't understand. I think maybe we have to read X-Men to find out why he's here. There's a little footnote that says see X-Men 193.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Because it's the time when he lost his powers a long time ago, and he was hanging out, I think, in the... obviously, he was romantically involved with Moira, but I haven't read X-Men 193 for a while, so I don't remember really.
We also meet Jamie Madrox, Multiple Man. He's working here and keeping track. All of his duplicates are helping out around the lab, making sure that everybody is being taken care of. So that's kind of cool to see a little cameo from him or from them. There's so many plot lines that are just going on behind the scenes. So there's another Lee Forrester Magneto scene where Lee wakes Magneto up from a dream that he's having, and his bed is floating, and he says that she saved his life in this instance. And I want to point out this scene in particular because the next scene is so different than one in the next issue. So keep this one in mind because I'll bring up the next one. There's also a subplot revolving around White Queen and one of her Hellions named Empath. Again, right out of the blue, this little thing is not going to pay off in this book at all. So it's like, why do we get this interlude? I have no idea.
It ties with the X-Men story with the Hellion. So it's 193, and it's a double-size issue with a big fight with the X-Men and the Hellions. I think there's also the what we didn't mention before is the Celine and Roberto's father joining the Hellfire Club. Also is a subplot that goes partly into X-Men, and the Roberto's father thing, I don't remember. I really don't remember how it evolves later on. So there's, once again, lots of breadcrumbs that you need to pick. I think that Empath plays a large role in the Firestar miniseries, and his attitude and manipulative personality plays a big part in Firestar as well. And he will be back throughout the New Mutants series.
Yes, and so this is where we mentioned the Firestar miniseries is referenced. This is the scene where it references that, and I really felt like I had no idea what was going on between these two because I hadn't read that miniseries, and I don't know what's going on here. So this scene doesn't even have any bearing on New Mutants at all. It's the stuff before it was in the Firestar miniseries, and the stuff after it is in X-Men 193. So why on earth is it here in this issue?
Yeah, very weird.
Very strange. Come on, Claremont. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that the way that Warlock is portrayed when he takes on human form on Muir Island here is very different from what we saw in the annual. And here you can see on page 376 of this collection here that he has a hard time making himself stay in a human-looking form. He's much easier. Of course, it's much easier for him to just stay in his techno-organic form. So it's like he sort of looks human, but he still has a lot of the Warlock stuff kind of coming out of him and such. Yeah, it's a good portrayal. I like that.
Yeah, and the way that bird thing plays, there's not so much being done by Warlock in this issue, but everything he does is really weird, but in a very good way. Like when he talks to the blackbird, or the bird thing that takes place almost between the panels. It's just in the background, and very interesting, especially with the thing Danny's touching Warlock and fearing of turning into something techno-organic as well.
Right.
When we know how later on Warlock and Doug will be very much a duet. So it's very interesting to see that taking place along the way.
Yeah, shades of things to come for sure. There is a lot of visually interesting stuff in this issue, and in all of these issues, in fact, because so much of it's going to take place in the Mindscape. But I really like on page 372, there is this is the page with the Multiple Man cameo. There's just a great scene of a house with like the sunset behind it, and he uses different types of screen tones to create the depth of the image, create the clouds and create the grass. I really like the use of that. It's kind of cool. And it just, that kind of thing takes time, and to just stick it right in the middle of that page there is an interesting choice.
It could have been some nice watercolor stuff. If someone like David Mack had done something like that.
I think that using the screen tones kind of fits with the
Mm.
just the dirty punk rock kind of look
Mm.
that Bill Sienkiewicz is going for. I think it fits. I also really like on page 378. This is the page where we get the first big picture of David.
Mhm.
Just he's laughing, and then right behind
Mm.
his head, Xavier is being thrown out of the astral plane and is hurtling back into his body on the other side of the panel. I really like the just that progression and how it's conveyed of him being literally kind of snapped back into his body.
And on the previous page, it's interesting to see how he gets into the astral plane as well.
Right, yeah, like he's trying to break through a piece of plastic or something.
Very interesting. And I think that this visual aspect of him getting out of the astral plane and getting into his body is very much what was done in the Doctor Strange and in the recent Spider-Man movie, when the body and the soul or the persona is taken out of the body.
Right, yeah.
I really think it ties with that. So it's very interesting. We get some bonus features there and bonus pages with the X-Men archives that reprinted those issues. Those are actually the first time I managed to get those Bill Sienkiewicz stuff, and it was one of the things that was very much done in the late 80s, early 90s, having some of the classic stories being reprinted in those prestige format series. So it was that was the first miniseries, and the next one was Captain Britain, and that's how I got all the classic Captain Britain by Alan Moore and Alan Davis, for instance. So it was a very nice series. Too bad it ended after that.
Nice. Yeah, I mean this is the days before graphic novels, so making a limited series with reprints was something that Marvel has kind of done all throughout their history, but they're still doing it in the 90s. It wasn't long after this that collected editions would become a thing, and you'd never see reprint series like this ever again.
Yeah.
Okay, New Mutants number 27, Into the Abyss. This issue takes place inside David's mind. Xavier believes that he needs to go inside David's mind to figure out what's going on, and so he and Danny go together, and it's just a wild ride as they go through all of these different places and meet a whole bunch of different creatures, different people, and two people in particular that they meet. One is Jack Wayne, which is a John Wayne type of a character, and another one called Cindy, who is definitely an analog to Cyndi Lauper, the 80s singer, 80s musician, and they're searching for who they call the Arab, who is seems to be causing problems and running amok inside David's mind. This is the first chance that we really get to see the extent to which David is mentally unstable. He has multiple personalities inside of his head, and these are personalities that I think because they're based on actual real people, he's probably influenced by the things he sees on TV or the music that he hears and such like that. So he's created these personalities based on that, and they live inside his head. And collectively, they call themselves Legion, which is where he gets his name. And that's a reference to the old biblical story where Jesus runs into a demon who's possessed a group of pigs. And the demon says, "We are many, so call us Legion," which is exactly what the voices inside Legion's head are saying here as well.
There are some very interesting things about those many personalities, because once again, it's leaps and bounds more mature than whatever we can see elsewhere. And also it ties, because I think it's 83 or 84, and it explains that David is the sole survivor of terrorist attack that took place in Paris. And that's the reason why. That's the reason why we see this strange visual of a mix, the 2-page with a mix of the Paris and Beirut at the same time.
Right.
And it really ties with what was happening back then, because there were a lot of terrorist attacks in Paris in the early 80s against the Jewish community.
Oh, okay.
So it ties with existing stuff, and obviously at the time, Lebanon was a very hard place. There was a war going on. There was a civil war going on. So it completely ties with that political landscape. So once again, it's something which is completely different with whatever you can see in a superhero book.
Wow, yeah. So I mean, you being French, of course, would know this history
Yeah.
much more than I would. I was not aware of those current events. That's very cool that they tie it into what's going on there. The one splash page, the huge splash page where we see kind of that combination of France and Beirut and the big black dome is wonderful. Again, he uses a couple of different screen tones to create the clouds in the sky and the different textures on the buildings and such, and it's just it's a really nice piece. Very limited in its color palette as well. It only uses 3 colors. The Eiffel Tower is a light blue, the ground and the foreground is a light yellow, and the sunset in the background is a light magenta. Oh, and I guess there's a little bit of green under the Eiffel Tower as well, but yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. And by the way, that's the Arc de Triomphe.
Right.
On the right.
Yeah.
So, and that's not at all Paris landscape. There's a huge difference between the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah. But, gotta cram in as many recognizable landmarks as you can.
Yeah, for sure.
The cool coloring and the use of screen tones continues through the next couple of pages, and it really gives it a visual look. In fact, if you go through this entire issue, each time the scene changes and they go to a different part of David's mind, Bill Sienkiewicz uses a very, very different visual style. So if you go back to the beginning when they first enter on page 391, where we're met with a solid red brick wall, and we have only 2 colors. All of the people are colored in white with some blue highlights, and you get the yellow of their energy beams playing off against the red on the wall. And as soon as they move into a different area, they're traveling through, it's now everything's blue. And then we enter this area here where we get the muted colors, the muted color palettes with a lot of the screen tone, which he wasn't using at all through the first part of this issue to give it a very different look. And that continues all the way to the end, and through the next issue, I guess, as well. But we'll see another visual change a little bit later. So I just love it. He's still being experimental. He's still trying new things. And I don't know how much he's talking to the colorist, but I have to imagine that he's like, okay, this is what I have in mind for this. Please don't use regular colors. Don't use skin tones. Just color everybody in yellow. It's very, very striking. I love it.
Yeah. Maybe also the inking helped that, because obviously there are more shades. So maybe also it was a leading indication of what type of vibe he was looking for. But it may involve some very interesting communication between the artist and the colorist.
This big black dome is so 1980s, and I feel it's like you think about end of the world type movies that came around there, and I don't know how many of them used a dome, but it's a pretty prevalent kind of visual image. It just so fits in with this era perfectly.
I just have to say that I have a complaint about this issue and the next one. It's really that I don't really feel like the new Mutants they are side characters in their own book here.
It's true, yeah. This is an Xavier story.
So it has to take place somewhere. There is very little that they don't serve any purpose or not so much purpose in the story. That's my main complaint about it. But it doesn't make it a bad story for sure, but just strange. And another thing which I felt was really weird is what is going on with Charles Xavier's eyebrows.
Yeah, they're pretty big.
Yeah, they're that wild. They have a life on their own, you mean?
Yes, they're bushy. They remind me of Eugene Levy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we don't get any subplots in this story at all. We don't get any Magneto Lee Forrester. We don't get any Selene or Emma Frost. It's just they take a break from all of that for this one issue, but we'll see them again in the next one.
Yeah, and I don't think we don't get extra page at the end. So it was really we don't get any bonus feature like character profile or something.
Yeah, that's true.
So issue 28 called Soul War. After a couple of pages, the whole team of New Mutants, Professor X, and 2 out of 3 or 4 personalities of David get together in order to attack the young Arabic character. And after a long trip and climbing and a lot of back and forth and a lot of talking scenes, it really feels like it's very, well, of course, it's a psychological issue. There are quite a lot of exchanges between all the different sides of David, and they eventually get together in the end and manage to find a solution to get together and work together inside David's mind, which I think is absolutely not the ending I was expecting.
Yeah.
So it's, when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, you feel like you're going to get rid of one or two of the personality or all of them and put things back in place. But that's absolutely not what is happening there. And this penultimate page where we see David being cured, between brackets, and having all the four personalities speaking to Charles Xavier and living together inside one mind implied that there would be trouble along the way in the future. But for now, they have found a situation where they can be together in one person's minds, which is really not the ending I was expecting. And everything builds toward that in that issue. In the exchanges between the different personalities, and that's what I loved really with this issue.
I think that this was I really like this issue. I've liked this whole story. I think the concept of exploring the way what do they call it now? They don't call it split personality anymore. It's like a dissociated. I can't remember what the actual title of the disorder is now, but just to take a look at what is going on inside a mind like this, the battle of personalities and the unsureness of who's in control or what, how they play off of each other. I think it's a very interesting way to look at this, and the concept of all of these memories being shards of glass floating around. I think that's brilliant as well, because you can just picture like someone whose mind isn't collected and everything's not in an order or anything. It's just chaos. It's wild, and you try to get in there to remember something, and your memories are shards of glass, so they're flying at you and hurting you. It's like then you have no reason to go in there and remember things or try to put things back in order or anything like that. And it's like just such an interesting analogy to that whole thing, the whole way of thinking. I think is neat.
I think also when you look at those 3 or 4 pages when the team enter into the Black Dome, it's almost modern art. It's abstract art. It's no longer what you see on a regular comic book, and it's something completely it's unknown territory for me. And once again, something that we won't see again on a regular classic comic book until obviously with Bill Sienkiewicz with Elektra Assassin and stuff like that, or when someone like David Mack with his watercolor work do something which is completely different visually than what we could have seen in regular comic books. So we almost tie with the abstract art, in my opinion, there.
Totally. Okay, so in the last issue, I mentioned that every time they go into a different scene, we get a visual change. And so this one, once they go into the Black Dome, of course, you mentioned the modern art. That's the first obvious change. But as they go through these memories, all of these panels, or most of them, are not, 90-degree right angle panels. Whereas when we were going through Broken Paris, all of those panels, it was a very kind of a regular, rigid, regular rectangle and square boxes. There was no diversion. There were no sideways panels. There were no, trapezoids or circles or whatever. But in this world, once they get to the memory area and things are kind of going all over the place, we get panels inside of panels. We get ones that are shaped like shards of glass. We get ones, panels that are the tiers get smaller and smaller as the panels go from left to right, and all of this kind of stuff. It's a very, very different visual cue to let us know that we're in an area of the mind that is not as grounded, is not as solid.
Yeah. The drawback of that is that it's almost you tend to look at the story and not read it.
Yeah.
Because it's so visually different. I mean, I was more looking at the details and so on. And I love this one panel when they enter the dome of Professor Xavier with two type of coloring and where his head is almost split into four parts and so on.
Right. Yep.
But you may lose some of the details and the explanation of what is happening and why David is who he is and in the situation he is, because there's a lot of explanation which is given there. For instance, there's this connection with, once again, the X-Men issue when X-Men 161 with the character of David's godfather, Daniel Shamron, who dies in the terrorist attack. And he was one of the characters that we met during. So there is a very interesting continuation between what we saw in X-Men and so on. So very comic booky stuff. And at the same time, we have this visual display of amazing art, which makes you lose a bit of the story, or I had to read the story like 2 or 3 times in order to get it completely.
Yeah, I can see that being a drawback for sure. It always is more work to read unconventional panel layouts and such, and that the visuals do become distracting. And I think that once you get so much dialogue like Chris Claremont likes to place in his panels anyway, I don't know, a lot of people I think will tend to go into skim mode and skim over things. But you absolutely can't here, because you're right. That's where all of the important information is. Okay, one more scene with Magneto and Lee Forrester. I told you to pay close attention to that last one where Lee saves Magneto's life and like they're in a good place. And in this one, I don't understand. Like she has a complete 180 change of opinion here now. Almost like I feel like we missed one of these little interlude scenes where they have some sort of a falling out or something.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's just so different. And then in the next issue, when we see them again, they're back to the way they were before. It's just out of place, and I didn't understand this one.
Yeah, but it's also about Magneto becoming more and more human and saying something like, "I beg you, I need you." So it was, and also it ties with Magneto's hatred for humans and the fact that he's obviously falling in love with the human and making efforts and being more and more open. And it ties with I think that what Claremont wants to showcase of the character. But yes, it feels like we missed something.
Yeah, I think we did. Okay, a couple more notes because this is the final issue of this story. I just want to wrap up a few things here. Doug Ramsey was in this story, even though we really didn't know that he was in this story, but he's here the whole time in the mind. The only reason this is the same as Rogue, he is used because he's going to translate the Arab language of this one person for everybody, so we can actually finally get the end of the story. But that's literally the only reason why he's here, and he's been kind of really pushed to the corners through this whole story.
And he has a New Mutant costume, even though it was never really clear that he had joined the team.
I guess it's official. Yeah. And then we also get the police officer and the nurse. They're in here as well still. And I don't know why they're in here, but just because they happen to be in proximity. But they don't really serve a purpose either. Their whole character, like we had one comment, like I don't understand why that change was made to their character, why they were made into Native American people, and then nothing is ever done of that. We find that that the police officer now has like some superhuman strength to go along with it, and that serves no real purpose through this story either. Just seems very, very random.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I think there's a website that was covering all the dangling subplots and the hints that Claremont had put in his book and it never really resolved because it was juggling with so many balls. Yeah. It's like this thing with when you think of the amount of time it took between the moment when we see the Starjammers and there is this subplot about Corsair being Scott's father and the time they really meet as father and son and so on, it's like, I think, 30 issues. So really, Claremont is juggling with so many balls that sometimes he forgets one of them.
Yeah.
And I think it could be one of those cases, like the ongoing things with that was happening in Uncanny X-Men about Wolverine's origin and the third Summers Brothers, even though it was after Claremont. So those were plots which were up in the air and up for grabs, really.
Right.
So it may have been one of those things that eventually was left on the side of the road.
It appears that way, yeah. Carrying on to New Mutants number 29. Now we are going to get onto a new storyline. It's going to be a 3-part story that will finish off this book here. This one's called Meanwhile, Back at the Mansion.
Or is it Gangway? Or is it Gangway?
Right.
Because of what we see. I don't know, really. No, I think it's Meanwhile, Back at the Mansion.
We're dumped into the middle of a story here, and I really feel like I don't know. This was another thing. Is like, did I miss an issue, or was there an annual story or something? Like, because Magma and Sunspot have been kidnapped, and Cannonball and Ilyana are racing through an airport to try and find them, and like they're wearing bathing suits, and it's like, what's going on? Why are they dressed the way they are, and how did they get kidnapped? And it's just out of nowhere.
So the kidnapping ties with a very small subplot that we see in the previous issue, and it ties with Empath giving Roberto and Magma's names to someone at the Hellfire Club.
Oh, okay. I missed that.
I think it's that connection, but okay, we have this very small half-a-page subplot. And suddenly it's done. They have been kidnapped, and well, we are in the situation where Sam and Ilyana's are in their bathing suit,
right,
in the middle of the snow.
Yeah. Okay. So that's right. Yeah. So I'm going back and on page 427. It's half of a page. It's not even a full page. Yeah. I remember reading that now, but I didn't make the connection that it's tying in there.
Yeah.
I think this last half of the book makes you make a lot of assumptions about what's going on. I think a lot of the time that's something that I think Claremont needed to hope to work on a little bit. But anyway, so the two of them are trying to find their missing teammates, and I guess because this is happening while the rest of the team is in Scotland, they have no one else to turn to, so they go to find Leela Cheney to see if they will help them out. And who is there as well? Is this the first appearance of Strong Guy?
Yes.
He is just a bodyguard. We don't even get his name or anything like that. He is just here, but he will become a major player in not too long from now. Actually, just a few years, he'll be a member of the X-Men and a member of X Factor. And then we also meet up with Dazzler, who has joined Leela Cheney's band. And this team will teleport to somewhere in order to find Roberto and Amara, who have been caught in this gladiator arena. So way back at the beginning, when we were talking about the very first Epic collection, my least favorite story of that collection was the Gladiator story. And now we're back in the Gladiator story, and I'm like, do we have to do this again?
Yeah, and especially because a lot of the context and the background of the story ties with that miniseries with
Beauty and the
Dazzler
Beast.
and the Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
Which was written by Ann Nocenti, who's the editor of the book. So the connection is there.
And Bill Sienkiewicz actually draws all of the covers for that miniseries.
And the Dazzler's covers as well.
Right, yeah.
A lot of Dazzler's covers were drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz. So there's this visual, editorial connection. But if you haven't read that miniseries, which is dreadful, by the way, it's super bad, but it establishes that Dazzler craves for fame and fortune after the end of a series and a subsequent graphic novel. So she signs up to join what she believes to be an underground music thing, but is this gladiator thing. So, and she joins, manages to, and the Beast is involved. I read that a long time ago. But that's the connection. And so this doesn't come out of the blue. This gladiator scene doesn't come out of the blue. But if you haven't read this miniseries, it's completely random.
Well, I mean, it's no more random than anything else that we've seen in this book. It's just they just get taken from adventure to adventure. And it's but this one I just wasn't on board with just because of the past association with the early issues. And then to top it all off, we get thrown into the middle of a Secret Wars 2 2 subplot, and so everything with the Magneto story has kind of led up to this point. Charles has reached out to Magneto saying, I need you to lead the X-Men. I got to go take care of this Beyonder issue. And so Magneto shows up at the end of this issue and is here to save the day. And
only doesn't really save the day. It just takes some of the New Mutants with him to go to that Beyonder thing, and the others are left behind, and the arena and the gladiator aspect isn't touched by that.
Yeah. So, and this is why I feel like, again, I'm missing something by not reading the full story. So between these issues, you really do have to go and read Secret Wars 2, issue 1, which is not included in this collection, because actually a lot happens there, and there is such a drastic jump between these 2 issues with very little explanation, and it's jarring. Some weird things in this issue include the fact that when they meet up with Leela Cheney, they're in their bathing suits, but Cannonball gets a change of clothes, but Magic doesn't. She doesn't get given any other clothes. And then also we meet up with this guy Axe, who is left over from the early issues of New Mutants, from that other Gladiator story. He's found another Gladiator ring. So it's like they're trying to make it almost exactly the same as those old issues. I mean, Amara is the main character in this plot that is actually kind of more like a subplot. And but it just, Axe appears in this one issue, and then we don't really see him again through this story.
Yeah.
It's just not well paced, not well thought out. I don't know. Didn't enjoy it.
There is one thing, because I know what's the situation with the villain in the story, that we find out. We find out who the villain is in the third story, in the third issue.
Yep.
And I know it's not explained, but I know what is the deal with that villain, because I know what happens in the following stories.
Right. I don't.
But there are hints of what is the situation from the page when Sam and the rest of the and Leela and Iliana and so on enter the room. So there are hints here. When you know the situation, you find one of the hints is there.
Oh, okay.
On the last panel. I can tell you offline what is the situation.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Yep.
But once again, you need to have a deep background knowledge of the X-Men and all that to figure it out.
I also think that the art takes a little bit of a step back. Not that it's bad, but it just is more reserved, because we just came off of 3 issues of a lot of really experimental ideas and art, and that was because we had a story that was taking place in a different dimension. But this one, we're kind of back to normal, and so I while I appreciate kind of going back to normal a little bit, I also was hoping that we'd keep up some of the more experimental aspects of his artwork, which I don't really see. In fact, this almost takes me back to the Moon Knight days in a lot of sense.
Yes, it's much more classic.
Yeah.
Than what we've seen in the previous issues, even though part of the Cloak and Dagger story was more classic than the Demon Bear and the Legion story. And that may be also because we can see them as the weakest, because it's more wordy, less experimental.
Yeah.
That explains a lot, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe Bill Sienkiewicz was less inspired by the plot on these stories.
It could be.
Yeah. So issue 30, The Singer and Her Song. So it ties with a lot of what was happening in Secret Wars 1. So, well, you have to read it, but it's the moment when the Beyonder from Secret Wars 1 arrives on Earth and start taking human shape and so on. And so the team which is gathered here at the beginning of this issue, what is the team that was on Secret Wars 1? So once again, it's not really a New Mutants team, because we get Kitty Pryde, we get Cannonball, we get Dazzler with a New Mutant costume, and we get Rachel Summers and Iliana, who has been turned into her Dark Child persona by the Beyonder, which is something that is a shock for the members of the team. So it's the first time maybe they completely understand the full nature of Iliana's power. The episode starts with this clunky team being in limbo and getting into a fight because Illyana seems to be possessed. Maybe by the Beyonders. It's not very clear for me what is really going on here. But eventually they get together and they come back in Los Angeles. Once again, convenient plot device, 1 week after the moment when they teleported. And Lila has left the picture, but they take her car and get back to the arena. And the idea is to try and infiltrate the arena, and it will be Dazzler because she was there before, and Kitty, who will be a kind of fixing person on the arena, who will try to infiltrate and reconnect with Amara and Sunspot. And we have the Beyonder lurking around and being in the scene as well, so it's really much of a tying aspect. And eventually the plan backfires because Dazzler gets possessed by a very large creature who appears to be the mastermind of the arena. And Kitty also gets abducted and inserted into a giant robot that attacks Amara and Sunspot at the end of the issue.
That's so weird.
Man, that was weird.
Like, what did you just say?
Yeah, I said, man, that was weird.
Yeah. Oh boy, so weird. Yeah, so I don't even know why you mentioned that they do a little time jump by a week. Don't know why. They just say it. It doesn't really serve a purpose. So the very first part of this issue is basically Claremont saying, "Oh man, I had to tie into Secret Wars, and they put me in this spot. So I'm going to spend the first couple of pages just driving back to where we were before."
Exactly.
So it's like if you take out these couple of pages with the Secret Wars stuff, you could just carry on as normal, except now we have Rachel and Shadowcat here, so I guess we have to explain how they got there.
Yeah,
but it's like,
well,
it doesn't have
the
any
thing is
tie-ins.
that because Secret Wars 2 was very much shoehorned into every Marvel publication then by Jim Shooter, who was writing the book. So it was an editorial mandate, which led to a lot of issues in other books. I remember very well the Spider-Man stuff, the Avengers, and the FF, dealing with that in the middle of existing plot lines. So sometimes it worked very well. There's a wonderful Fantastic Four story with the Torch and the Beyonder, for instance, which is one of the highlights of John Byrne's run. And some of the stuff is very shoehorned and forced and doesn't work, like here, for instance.
Which is a shame because Secret Wars 1 was so well thought out, with all of the heroes disappearing and then reappearing right away, having been changed. Like, they had thought out what those changes would be, the black costume, things staying behind on Battle World and all of this, and then dealing with the repercussions in those issues in each of those titles. But this one, yeah, you're right, it's shoehorned to the point where Claremont's like, I just gotta ignore all of that to get back to my story that I started last issue. No consequence at all.
Yeah, well, that's most of the repercussions of Secret Wars 1 were dismissed very quickly because for the example of the black costume, Tom DeFalco, who was writing Spider-Man, said in interviews that he said, okay, we take the costume, but we ditch it after 12 issues max. Iron Man, he had this extra padding and stuff on the armor that he ditched literally, physically, the issue right when he gets back from Secret Wars. The major point, the major impact for me was She-Hulk joining the Fantastic Four.
Right, yeah.
That was a very important thing back then. But yeah, that's one of those examples of things being shoehorned.
Yeah. And in this issue, I did really feel lost, having not read the Beauty and the Beast storyline, to the point where it's like, Dazzler gets saved by this pterodactyl creature, and like they have a back history, apparently. She calls him by name, but I'm like, we've never seen this guy before. So it's like obviously there's a big story here that we don't get in behind the scenes. But I mean, this is a turning point for Dazzler, who since she was dealing with all of this stuff about her desire for fame through the last few appearances and the end of Dazzler and the miniseries and such, she's now come to the point where she's assured of herself. She has faced her, not fears. She's just faced her insecurities and has become a more sure person. So she's going to be she's going to play a big role in the next issue as the New Mutants face off against Kitty Pryde in the body of a giant robot.
Yeah. Positive thing about this issue is that as it's a weirder issue with the limbo scenes and some of the display of Dazzler power. I think it's less of a classic looking issue. And it's visually, because we have also the Beyonder scene when Rachel tries to enter into the Beyonder's mind.
Yep.
I think it's a visually more interesting and more adventurous issue than the previous one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that one panel near the beginning where they're in limbo and they're like all distorted and kind of twirling around. Good stuff. Yeah. And there are a few weird things as well. Like on page 476, when Cannonball and Magic are having a conversation under a tree, Cannonball's forehead is like massive. He's got this huge head, and it's these kind of liberties that Bill Sienkiewicz takes that, he doesn't always draw Sam with that huge head, but he did there, and it kind of stands out. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep on going to the last issue, New Mutants number 31. This is the last issue of this book, the last issue of our episode. It's called Saturday Night Fight. So here we are. Roberto and Amara are in the Gladiator still, which I don't exactly know why, like how they're being forced to stay there. I guess they have inhibitors or something that are making their powers not as powerful, but they still have their
inhibitors and drugs.
They still have their powers though.
Yeah, but they have inhibitors, so they don't escape, and they are drugged, so that they are kind of in a. That's sort of explained in the previous issue.
I just feel like it's this whole story is kind of shoehorned to make it work.
Oh yeah.
And there are so many elements here that you have to just really stretch your believability to, like, why on earth is this story going on for so long? Because our heroes were there a few times and should have just taken care of business, but instead, all of this is building actually to find out who's in charge. That's the whole reason for this story, is to bring a character back into play, and we don't exactly know why she's coming back into play. We thought she was dead, but through the fight, Kitty frees herself actually from this giant robot, and they try to escape this place, but then find out that the person in charge is their former teammate Karma, who is now very, very obese, and I guess in charge of this gladiatorial ring. We don't really get an explanation about all of this. She just says, "You gotta ask Professor X. He knows what's going on here," and that's about it. So it's a bizarre issue. It doesn't, a lot of it is filler with this giant robot, and that takes up half of the issue, is fighting the robot with Kitty inside. And then we meet Karma, and it's a very different person than we thought she was, and then she disappears. And so we're left with the team thinking, okay, we got to go on a journey to go find Karma. And this is only half of the team. So the other half of the team, which is Douglas, Rain, Danny, and Warlock, they don't, like, Warlock and Douglas haven't even met Karma, but they don't know that they're around. So I guess in the next issue we're gonna find out, we're gonna get the team all back together again, which will be nice because they haven't been a full team since the Demon Bear Saga.
And I think it makes sense what you said, that the two stories may take place in parallel, sort of, because it's completely different lineup. On each story, so could be something like that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they're happening at the same time. Well, not exactly the same time, because at the very end of the Legion story, that's when Professor X says the Beyonder is coming, and then at the beginning of this one is when the Beyonder is coming. So they're not happening at the same time. They're happening one after the other, but they are focusing on the team that didn't go to Scotland.
Yeah, true. I think this story is it's weaker than the others, but I think there is a really nice interest around the issue of fame and fortune, and it's very much centered around Dazzler, who really needed to become a more interesting character, and she would join the X-Men not so long after that. and become a completely different character once again, even though she still has this thing with fame and being recognized and so on. So that's very much her story arc, once again, rather than the New Mutants story arc.
There's a couple of times when they make the parallel of fame to heroin, and like she's addicted to fame like a heroin addict is addicted to that drug. And I think that, you know, they didn't want to go in that direction, but this is a lot of the reason why you'll find that, you know, rock stars or famous people are drug addicted is because they get a high from just the being famous. Like it releases certain endorphins or whatever to give you more adrenaline when you're on stage and all this kind of stuff, and then you come crashing down afterwards, and then dealing with the constant stress and anxiety of people, interviews, and the general public, and always having to be on and be in a certain place. Like people do turn to other substances to help either heighten or lessen a lot of these emotions and end up in a pretty bad place. And I think they probably didn't want to go that way, all the way down that road with Dazzler just because of the comic code or whatever. But I think that they're trying to allude to the fact that she is definitely having some addiction problems without actually making it about drugs.
Well, had it been in the 2000s or later in the 90s and so on, it could have been a much darker story.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that's hinted because they mentioned the fact that the gladiators are drugged, and sometimes, you know, there's one moment when Dazzler comes back and she takes one of the drugs, and she said she took a massive dose and she will not want to go back and stuff like that. So it's hinted, once again, very lightly because of the comics code, even though I don't know how much of those issues were code approved because of the visuals and stuff.
Yeah, but that's different. I mean, I think the comic code from the very beginning, as we know from that Stanley Norman or Harry Osborn story that didn't have the code, that they're very, very sensitive about issues relating to real world drugs. And so I think because art is subjective, it's not like it's a different thing when trying to pass those kind of visuals like horror. I mean, it wasn't gruesome or gory, so that they didn't need to worry about that with the comic code, but it's different than dealing with the societal issues like drug addiction.
Sure. And so that means that this volume really contains the whole bunch of Bill Sienkiewicz stuff. He will keep on board. He will stay on board as an inker. So the book will still have his touch for a few issues, but if you want to have the whole Bill Sienkiewicz thing on New Mutants, that's the book you need.
It's amazing that he actually had a fairly short run. It wasn't that long at all, but it made such a splash, and it's very highly remembered. Well, I guess maybe only the Demon Bear Saga as some of the New Mutants' best stuff, even though it's just such a short period in the larger picture.
And so that's why we have this thanks thing under Bill Sienkiewicz signature on the last splash page,
right?
Which is I think it's also something that wants to highlight the whole team and is a nice way to say goodbye.
It is. It's an odd picture, and I don't know. I think like it because half of the team is kind of in an astral form, and they don't get as much detail, and all of their characters are in either their gladiator form or their swimsuits or whatever. It's like, wow, this is the last image that we're gonna get from Bill of his team. Kind of strange.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
but yeah. And then there's also the issue of just why did Chris Claremont decide, or was this a Bill Sienkiewicz idea? I don't even know why Karma is so incredibly huge, and this comes into sorry, go ahead.
So that is what you will find out in the next epic collection.
Right. Oh, I'm sure. It's strange that he makes this decision, and then it's compounded with the two people who turn into Native Americans. It's like, why are we taking able-bodied white people, or in Shan's case, she's not white, but why are we taking an able-bodied person and putting it in a not able-bodied person body? And why are we taking white people and putting them in not white people bodies? It's in order to upset their lives and to make them... It feels like we're saying that they are now in lesser bodies than they were before, which I don't think is a very good messaging at all.
There's a very clear difference between the two situations because I had to dig and find out what was the deal with Shan, and it's a completely different story than the Native American thing.
Okay. Well, I mean,
No spoilers there.
Yeah, no spoilers. Yeah, I mean, dealing with that down the road, you can come up with the reasons as well. But I mean, taking it on, I guess, on surface value based on what I'm reading in this book, it's kind of weird, a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, there we are. We have finished the second New Mutants epic collection, the Demon Bear Saga. The first, of course, obviously, the real standout story is the Demon Bear Saga itself, with a worthy follow-up being the Legion story in the second half of the book. What are your thoughts, Frank, overall?
Oh, exactly the same. Well, it was a harder to read collection than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
But it definitely looks great. And sometimes, as I said, you may feel like looking at the page rather than reading its content. Well, eventually, it completely deserves its classic following and status that it has gained. And we have to keep in mind that it's the early 80s we're talking here. So it's groundbreaking stuff, sure. Visually speaking. And even it still is today. I mean, you don't really see that many comic books like that on a mainstream book. I mean, in indie stuff, yes, obviously. But here it's mainstream mutants. So some of the top-selling books we're talking about, and we get some very, very strange looking stuff and very, the word doesn't come, but it's very forward looking and abstract art kind of thing that you get there.
I'm glad they took the risk because I'm sure it was a risk. I'm sure it was because Bill Sienkiewicz, even he says it in some of the bonus features in the back, that his work is very divisive. Some people love it, some people hate it. And to be put as a regular penciler on a book, and I don't know how well the New Mutants was doing at the time, if it was a high-selling book or if it was just moderate, but just the fact that you're putting a controversial artist on the title could be potentially really damaging. But I think because they started it off with the Demon Bear Saga story, it worked to the benefit. Could you imagine if they had started with the Cloak and Dagger story?
Or the gladiator story.
Or the gladiator story, yeah. It would have been a very, very different reaction, I think, to Bill Sienkiewicz's work.
I wish, sometimes I really wish that the Epic collection had the original letter pages. In this case, I wish I could read them. Well, because the reaction must have been polarized.
I'm sure. It's hard to tell also because, of course, those letters are also filtered through editorial to get just the ones that they want to show.
Yeah, but I remember seeing on other books some very different point of views. So, yeah, it could have been one of those cases. And I'm pretty sure they must have had as much negative letters as positive ones. So they should have reflected that back in the days. But
yeah, they always do put in the counter side for sure. And Marvel I don't know about DC, but Marvel's never afraid to print a letter that is angry at them for doing something. But what we don't know is the balance of how many angry letters versus good letters. Like if they got 100 bad letters and 2 good letters, and they printed the 2 good letters and put 1 bad letter, it would make it seem like there was more positive than negative.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you know what? I think way back when we did an episode about the New Mutants Epic Collection Volume 7, Curse of the Valkyrie, and we did the last half of that, and we actually started recording the first half of it, but never got around to finishing that. So why don't we just skip ahead a little bit, finish off the rest of that Epic Collection, Curse of the Valkyrie, and then we'll move on in the podcast. We'll move on to a different title completely.
Yeah. Good idea to tie things up on this one.
Yeah. The New Mutants hasn't released yet Volume 3 or 4. We have Volume 5 and we have Volume 8, so there's plenty of stuff that we could still do with the New Mutants, but I think that after this we'll give it a break and come back to New Mutants sometime in the future, hopefully when we get Volume 3 and 4, because I would like to continue on with the story from the beginning here.
All right.
Well, listeners, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and join my Epic Collection Facebook group if you search for Epic Collections, and otherwise, and my YouTube channel. But I want to thank you, Frank, for joining me. I know that you being in France and me being in Canada, we have to work on our time zone difference, so I appreciate you working with me to make this work and for being a part of these episodes.
It's always a blast, so I had a great time.
Great. We'll see everybody next week for one more New Mutants episode. See you later.
Take care. Bye-bye.